Hello, welcome to Mio's MMA breakdown for UFC. What number are we on, anyways? In the title, it'll definitely say, but UFC 273 Volkanovski versus Korean Zombie. One of the few fighters that gets to use his nickname instead of his name. Basically, you're looking at like Crow Cop and then like Zombie. I can't really think of anyone else, even in UFC history, that's really gotten that honor, ability, whatever you want to call it. A couple of people in Pride, but that is, I think, the extent of it in the UFC. I'm, of course, Mio, and I am running solo today on the breakdowns. My immediate thoughts on this card are interesting. On one hand, I understand that it's a little bit lackluster because of losing a bunch of fights, because this card has been plagued by a lot of lost fights. We were supposed to have Pat Sabatini versus Gavin Tucker. That's a fun fight that we don't have anymore. We were supposed to have Irene Aldana versus Aspen Lad. That was a very fun fight, very relevant. And I mean, I guess we were replaced with Raquel Pennington versus Aldana with the whole Imanov, Gastelum, Chris Curtis, Dricus Duplessis thing, which is falling apart. That was two interesting fights that have gone off the card. We lost Albert Duraev versus Anthony Hernandez, which was going to be a good fight. We lost Alexei Olenek versus Igor Latifi, which is two legends, even if the actual matchup is not spectacular, going up against each other. And that's gone. And then we have a lot of big fights here. We got two title fights, which we're going to talk about. We got the Gilbert Burns versus Chimaev fight. We got Tj Torres versus MacKenzie Dern. And these all feel like really big fights. But when you're me and you're just kind of a nerd for finding out things or enjoying the intricacies of the technique that is on display, they're a little dull. In the case of Aljo versus Yan, because we've seen it. In the case of Volkanovski and Jung, because I love Korean Zombie, but I don't really see a way for him to win. And I think the dynamic in Dern versus Torres is kind of, it goes one of two ways. It's a two true outcome fight. So that's a little bit lame. And then the undercard is not spectacular, but we have seen in the past that cards that have not really been hype worthy have over delivered. So maybe that's the case here. Maybe we got ourselves a really good fight, and I just don't quite know it. Let's get on, shall we? So in the main event, we have the the featherweight championship bout. Alexander Volkanovski, Chan Sung Jung. Obviously, I touched on this. I'm going with Volkanovski to win. I'm not sure how, because I think any real option could work. I could see him pounding out Chan Sung Jung. I could see him club and subbing him. I could see him taking it to decision. I do have a constant concern about Volkanovski, and that is he is 5'6", with a 71.5-inch reach advantage, which for the weight class is quite low. Actually, the reach is not even that bad necessarily, because I mean, I'm realizing now that Chan Sung Jung is actually only got a half inch on him, an inch in height. But still, I do worry about like the short armsness and the ability for someone to work from the outside and take him and kind of immediately find gaps in his game. It's something Holloway started doing during their fights, but wasn't able to get it going early enough because Holloway is always this building fighter. Kind of always starts out, I want to say flat, because it's not flat. It's not the right word to say that it is flat. But it's a kind of like what we're talking about this with Peter Yan in a bit. It's a fighter that likes to get his reads and likes to build on in cage, as opposed to a game plan beforehand that he's instantly going to execute from the very beginning. And then Brian Ortega is, well, a greatly improved striker, particularly as a dangerous striker. He's still a bit of a mess in terms of putting it together from the outside. So we haven't really seen him against top-level competition answer that question. But does Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie, actually do that? The answer to me is no. he does have a decent outside game. He does have a good jab. He will throw in combination. He will manage the distance fairly well. But at the same time, his game is still built around pocket striking and into the clinch even. Weird submissions, obviously, are a hallmark of his game. And that means that he's going to really not exploit the only weakness that we see in Volkanovski's game. Because Volkanovski is a very good wrestler. He's a very, very good pocket striker. And he will break you down with counters. Korean Zombie is pretty counterable. I see him controlling this fight pretty much all the way through. I don't. Obviously, there's a way for Zombie to win. And it's the big moment, hurt Volkanovski, sub him or pound him out, similar to the moment that Ortega gave him in his last fight. But in terms of replicatability, in terms of consistent offense, I don't think that there is anything that Korean Zombie brings to the table. And in that regard, that's why it's kind of a flat fight, even though he's two fighters that I really, really, really like. It's kind of a weird feeling. It's kind of a weird feeling to be underwhelmed by this fight, but I am. So there you go. I'm taking Volkanovski. Decision would be the smart bet because the Zombie is super tough. But he is finishable. Volkanovski's been talking about wanting to be a finisher. So I'm going to say like a third round TKO is going to be my pick. But honestly, you could see going anyway in terms of the finish. Aljamain Sterling versus Peter Yan. My God, have I seen some ridiculous Aljo hate recently. So what do I mean by ridiculous Aljo hate? Obviously, Aljo is the least legitimate champion in the UFC right now. And the reason is he won the title via DQ in a fight that he was absolutely losing. And there's a certain level of skepticism that's going to come with that. Apparently, he gave some interviews where he said some things about being the champ and people took that the wrong way. I didn't see them. I saw the aftermath where he seemed very disgusted to have won the belt the way he did. Yes, he has referred to himself as the champ, but he's the champ. He's telling the truth. And if there's a yawn here or a hiccup, I apologize. A little tired, and I feel hiccups coming on. We'll try and plow through it and do my best here. But then there's like this weird thing, like people are trying to treat it like, oh my God, no one would ever take a knee in the center of the cage. No one would ever be on their knee. His game plan the whole time was to get Yan DQ'd. Anything to admit that Peter Yan screwed up and need a very clearly downed opponent and got DQ'd. And then, of course, there's the, he could have totally continued. He was milking it. He was selling it. Here's the thing. I feel like the people who say that have never eaten a knee to the dome because it's not an experience. Number one, it's not an experience that anyone even could really predict. Because that was a nasty, nasty knee. I have no doubt that Aljamain Sterling was not in condition to compete after that knee. And it was very, very illegal. And as far as the whole strategy thing is concerned, fighters end up on their knees all the time. Granted, it's usually more against the cage as opposed to the center of the cage. But there was an episode of Tough some time ago where Rich Franklin, when he was a guest coach, I think it was the Hughes versus Sarah season of The Ultimate Fighter, so one of the early ones, where he's talking about, dropping to a knee to avoid being kneed on the takedown. We've had this for a long time. This is not a unique scenario. This is not a gaming the system even, really. So I don't understand it. I don't get it. I'm picking Yan. So I went through that whole tangent without even really talking about the fight. Obviously, we saw the first fight, and I want to make sure I get the number of the time period right here. The previous fight was March of 2021, so we've had about a year and a month. And the problem is during that time, Aljo has been injured, and I don't honestly think that there is some small adjustments or some small successes to build on into a game-winning plan. I think really the question with this fight is concerned is how confident is Jan going to be in like round one? Because Peter Yan has historically been a slow starter. Similar to what I said about Max Holloway, he likes to get reads, he likes to build. And in a rematch, does that apply? Or does Jan just come out and look like, I know what you're doing, and I'm going to break you down, and I'm going to finish you in the second round? I mean, that's entirely possible. It's entirely possible that that's the case. I think it'll go longer. I think probably like a fourth round TKO is what we're looking at here, but Jan just has the answers for Sterling. Now, there's been some talk about, is Peter Yan overrated? I think it depends on who you're talking to, because there are definitely people who overrate just about any fighter on the planet. Pick a fighter and you can find a fan who overrates them to a great degree. Is Peter Yan overrated by a section of the MMA fan base? I think absolutely. Just because I think there are people who think he's unbeatable. I think there are ways to beat him. I think you have to get off to a good start, though. I think you have to have some overwhelming offense, some power quotients, and Aljamain Sterling is one of the least knockdown fighters in the game. He's credited with having 0 knockdowns, although I would say he knocked down Jeremy Rivera. And I believe that makes him like the second most like landed strikes or something without a knockdown in UFC history. So it's not the type of thing he's gonna do. So like I said, fourth round finish. This is the most interesting fight on this card, at least the main card to me. Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev. Now, I have been we're going to do air quotes here, hater of Chimaev, just because I have not been a big believer on anything I've seen in a UFC cage. If we look at his UFC run, I thought that because people were super hyped about him after he beat probably the Reese McKee fight. I don't think people got crazy after John Phillips' debut, but they got a little crazy after the Reese McKee fight, where it's like, all right, this guy has come in, he's beaten John Phillips, who's a very one-dimensional fighter. He's beaten Reese McKee, who's a very unphysical fighter. And then he beat Gerald Meerschaert. And sure, it's cool to knock a guy out in 17 seconds, but it doesn't really tell us a ton. It really doesn't. It's not like Meerschaert hasn't been knocked out before. And then he had COVID. And I was really worried when he came back from COVID. And that's why I picked the Leech to beat him. I thought, I can't, in good conscience, pick this guy, who I'm still not entirely sold on, to come back from COVID in a very serious case of COVID and go out there and blow the doors off the Leech. And then he went and blew the doors off the Leech. Now, I'm going to say this, despite what I just said there about starting to become a believer in Chimaev, and I am picking him to win this fight, Gilbert Burns presents a very serious challenge to him. It's a guy who probably is a better grappler than him. Might be a more technical striker, although I think Chimaev has more physical tools in the stand-up game. He is also huge. Burns is a former lightweight, so there's certain power discrepancies there and strength discrepancies. So I think Chimaev's going to win. I think it's going to be by second round TKO. But I would not be surprised if Burns is actually going to win this fight. And I definitely think it's going to be a lot more challenging than some people think. Because a lot of people think he's going to blow Burns completely out of the water. It's going to look like Chimaev versus the Leech. I don't think it is. I think Burns is on a different level to the Leech. I still don't know where Chimaev goes long term. I think there's definitely a title shot in the future. Obviously, Dana White loves him. The UFC loves him. He's putting up great numbers. I have the inside track from someone who's trained with him that says that the hype is real. But I think the hype train just came early. We'll see. We'll see. His stand-up is still a little clunky, I think, at times. His wrestling is it's not amazing technically. But he's incredibly physically imposing, and he's incredibly dogged in his approach. Eugene Robinson over at Bloody Elbow had this theory that he's also a very rhythmic fighter, and if you can disrupt the rhythm, that maybe he'll fall apart. We did see the Leech try that. It didn't work. That doesn't mean it can't be done. Because I do definitely see that. Like he's predictable in his rhythm as a striker, anyways. I don't know about as a grappler particularly. But I do see him being too much for for Burns, just on a physical level, similar to how Kamaru Usman was too much for Burns. There are definitely some tremendous similarities there. So I am going with Chimaev. I think it's going to be a very interesting fight. I think Burns has some striking that will give him trouble. And I think this is probably the first time in Chimaev's career that he's going to be facing someone who can probably out-grapple him. And how he deals with that is going to be very, very interesting, because if he just decides to, approach Burns like he's every other opponent he's had, which is to say, basically a bum that he's going to smash, it might get him in trouble. But I am going to pick Chimaev. I have been a non-believer in the past. I'm coming around on it. I'm not there yet, but we're getting there. MacKenzie Dern versus Tj Torres. I have always been in the bag for Tj Torres, so to speak, in the sense that I have enjoyed her development as a fighter pretty much since I discovered her in Invicta. Not that I discovered her, but the first time I saw her in Invicta. In that she's gone from being this kind of traditional martial artist type girl to a scrambler, a bit of a brawler when it suits things. She adapts to the situation. And that's why I like her chances against MacKenzie Dern, because if she came in and fought MacKenzie Dern without recognizing Dern's skills, which a lot of fighters will, they will fight to type regardless of the opponent. How they fight has very little to do with the opponent. It has to do with what they feel comfortable with. Torres seems good at actually attacking the weaknesses of her opponent. And there's a lot of weaknesses in MacKenzie Dern. That being said, she is training with Jason Perillo. I expect that striking to get better, but the striking is still a bit lackluster. Her ability to initiate grappling exchanges is also fairly weak. She's got good takedowns from the clinch, but you have to be willing to be there with her. And I do wonder if Torres can essentially float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, move in and out of the pocket, land shots. You can't stay 100% safe on the outside because, of course, Torres, very limited reach. She's probably an atom weight, although she's been getting increasingly larger. She will be having a 2-inch reach disadvantage. Feels like that should be more, actually, in this fight. And when she engages, she's going to have to go into range and then back out and work the footwork game. Can she do that consistently? And if it does go to the ground, how long do you survive with MacKenzie Dern down there? Because MacKenzie Dern, I've grabbed on the striking, but grappling-wise, chef's kiss. It's amazing. It's arguably the best grappling you're going to see in women's MMA right now. She's fantastic at just about everything on the ground. And if it goes there, Torres is going to be in trouble. How much of Mackenzie Dern's loss to Marina Rodriguez is replicatable for Torres? Because Torres does not have the same level of power, and she does not have the same level of reach. So, I don't know. I've been going back and forth on this one. This is a fight that, honestly, I'm going to have a pick here. And by fight time, my pick may have completely changed. Because it has changed a couple of times. Part of me is like, okay, at some point, Torres is a little too comfortable clinching with people. She's going to get in the clinch. She's going to get taken down. She's going to be in trouble. But another part of me is like, but Torres has good footwork. She has good foot speed. She has good combinations. Part of me is like, she can definitely work the striking game, the sprawl and brawl, as it were, with a lot more movement, and beat up Dern, because Dern's striking is not good. Right now, I'm feeling Torres by decision, because she's not really a finisher. That is the other concern, is she doesn't have great deal power. She's not a knockout puncher. She's going to have to win by volume. And that means continuously subjecting herself to a zone of danger around MacKenzie Dern, where Dern might be able to pull her in a clinch, might be able to get her to the ground. But right now I'm thinking she's going to win, but it may be Dern by fight time. And that's kind of really the only fight on this card that I feel that way, that I'm not got a strong thought about. Yeah, maybe the next fight a little bit. And then there's one later on the card. But anyways, let's get to the next fight. This is the last fight on the main card, which is Vince from Hell Pichel versus Marco Madsen. And I'm picking Marco Madsen here. Now, I'm not the biggest believer in Marco Madsen. He's a stud wrestler, obviously, and he's showing a much developing boxing game. Good jab. Got the job done against Clay Guida, which was a fight that a lot of people thought that he would not get the job done in. And he did. I still have concerns, though, about a guy who is kind of hitting MMA as late as he is. He's 37 years old, but he is with a good gym. Still looks like he's in physically good shape, but it's lightweight. It'll, at some point, I think, catch up to him. But number one, Vince Pichel, is actually older than him at 39 years old. So this is the oldest fight on the card, I do believe, by a good margin. Maybe the Olenek fight. We'll see there. But combined age of 76 years old is pretty up there for a UFC fight. And the thing about Vince Pichel is that almost all of his wins come with some element of shutting down someone else's wrestling or implementing his own wrestling game on them. And can he do that to a Olympic level wrestler? I don't think so. I don't think that's the way to do it. I think this is more forgiving, but a similar matchup to when he fought Gregor Gillespie, because I don't think he can control the fight. And without that, sure, he does still have fairly heavy hands. He's a bit of a sneaky finisher as well. Has a sneaky lethal venom to him. But I think either option for O'Madsen does work. He could do the Clay Guida thing where he works behind the jab, works the combination boxing, shows the improvements there. Or he can just revert to form and out-wrestle Pichel, because Pichel isn't necessarily super dangerous from the bottom, although he can be dangerous in scrambles. So I'm going with O'Madsen to win a decision here. I do think that he has a ceiling. I just don't think that it's Vince Pichel. I am seeing him as slight underdog odds, by the way. I haven't talked about betting odds because I haven't been super interested in them prior to this fight, but I'm seeing plus 130 for O'Madsen, minus 150 for Vince Pichel. Might be some good value there. What was the Dern versus Torres? Torres is a slight favorite. That's surprising. I thought I was going to be somewhat in the minority by really thinking Torres had a good chance here. Interesting. It's pretty close. It's minus 125 plus 105. But that is closer than I thought it was going to be. That's disappointing because I was hoping to make some money off that fight. But such is life. Darren Weeks versus Ian Gary. I'm not on the Ian Gary hype train just because he still hasn't fought anybody. His biggest win is Jordan Williams in a fight that he was looking kind of lackluster in until he knocked him out. Now, he does definitely have knockout power. There are things to get excited about. But I don't know. Maybe it's just the Conor McGregor cheap knockoff, Conor McGregor Redux act that he does, which unfortunately has kind of enveloped a lot of the Irish MMA scene. He does train with Sanford MMA, though, so, quality camp, good athletic tools to build on. I just don't think he's I don't think he's what people think he's going to be, because there are people that think he's going to be instantly a champion in the very near future, which is weird because a lot of those are the same people that believe Khamzat Chimaev is going to be the champion for a long time to go, and they're in the same weight class. So it's It's a bit weird. But I do think he'll beat Darian Weeks. Darian Weeks is just not UFC caliber, really. Like, I'm not saying he can't be in the long term, but he's a guy who has beaten, get ready for these names, Zach Long, Travis Ford, Blaine Richards, Dustin Parrish, Craig Farley, or Fairley. If any of those got you super excited, good for you. Because it didn't get me super excited when he was called in on late notice to fight Brian Barberena. And as much as Brian Barberena came out and kind of turned the clock back against Matt Brown and looked a little bit like the old Brian Barberena, he's not looked great lately. And so losing to him, it's not a great look to then go fight Ian Gary. And also, this kind of shows with the Paddy Pimblett fights as well. The UFC is interested in promoting Gary, and they're interested in taking the slow route. And, that means that this is a fight they think he can win. And I tend to agree. Surprised he's actually minus 350, plus 260 for Weeks. So, I don't know. I was hoping Weeks would be like a plus 500 underdog or something that I could, throw some money that I'm perfectly happy losing onto him. But in case he wins, because I do think Gary is less complete than people think, that there would be value there. It doesn't look like there really is, though. Oh, next up, we got a little bit of the piss break fight. Because I don't think it's going to be super exciting, although I do believe Jairzinho Rodenstruck is going to knock out Marcin Tybura. My stock in Tybura went down a lot. Ironically, in a fight that he was not involved with, which was the Aspidol versus Volkov fight. Because Aspidol went out there and just cut through Volkov. And Tybura lost to Volkov. And it's not that there's any shame in losing to Volkov. Volkov, very, very good fighter. This is kind of similar to like people writing off Chris Daukaus after he lost 2 fights in a row to Derek Lewis and Curtis Blades. I think that's a little crazy. It's the same thing here, but I think Aspinall highlighted something that we kind of had been giving Volkov credit for being really difficult to take down, and we might have been overplaying that hand significantly. And that says some bad things about Tybura's takedown game. And as much as Rozenstruik has a little bit of a Derek Lewis vibe to him, in the sense that he's a better striker, but probably hasn't learned to be as heavyweight as Derek Lewis, which is the super patience, the relying on the knockout game. I don't think he instantly gets subbed by Tybura. And I think he also one of Tybura's big things was getting Greg Hardy down, and then we saw Spivak do it pretty damn easily. So it's hard to really again, it's like his performances are just not aging well right now. I like Tybura. I still hope he does some good things, but I think he loses to Biggie Boy. I think that Rozenstruik has the primary thing you need at heavyweight, which is he hits really, really hard. And he paces himself reasonably well to actually be able to go 3 rounds. And I'm going to say, and Tybura also tends to start slow. So I've got a first round knockout for Rozenstruik. I'm not super intrigued by the fight. If you've been listening or watching to me a while, you know that heavyweight MMA does not thrill me a lot of the time. It's kind of the lowest end of the skill pool a lot of the time, and it is what it is. But I don't know. We might get something cool here. Aspen Lad versus Raquel Pennington. This is a late notice replacement fight, of course, with Lad was supposed to originally fight Irene Aldana. Yes. What weight class is this at? This is at 135. Okay, so Aspen Lad's back at 135. It's kind of weird. Aspen Lad was someone I hyped fairly significantly up until somewhat recently, just because her attitude is somewhat painful. The UFC is going to treat fighters differently based on their marketability and their relationship with the UFC all the time. And that's not the fighter's fault. And to be honest, you take advantage of that. But Aspen Lad has a weird thing where, like, she denies that the UFC seems to be treating her somewhat specially. And also, she's in that weird territory of dating your coach. I'm never really down with that. Now, all right. Full disclosure, I've never had a female coach. At least not in a significant position of authority. There's been like student coaches who are women, like, teaching technique and so on. But like the head coaches and the senior coaches at the gyms I've been at have traditionally been men. So I don't know. Like, would I react entirely differently to the idea of having a female coach and then finding that romantically interesting or whatever? I don't know, but I find what I've been through to be completely uninteresting. Could just be that they've all been guys. I think it's a bad idea, and I don't think it's ended well, particularly for anybody. I think JoJo Wood, for example, has kind of gone downhill. Although I think, to be honest, JoJo Wood always had a ceiling that she's just bumping up against. I don't think it's necessarily her relationship with John Wood that's doing it. But I don't know. It feels weird to me. It feels like a weird power dynamic. Anyways, Pennington, Lad. It's weird because Lad was coming off one of her most impressive performances kind of before this whole like downturn started. She beat Yara Kunitskaya. It was very impressive. Kunitskaya's a tough out. Prior to that, she had beaten Sarge Eubanks. That's a tough out as well. And of course, she got kind of questionably beat down by Durandamine. But she just looked so lost and lifeless and not good against Norma Dumont. Maybe Norma Dumont is just way better than I think she is. And I do think Norma Dumont is actually a pretty reasonable fighter. But to look that out of it, I don't know what's going on with Aspen Lad from a mental standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from a tactical standpoint. I don't know. I really don't. There's a really good fighter in there. There's a fighter in there that probably should beat Raquel Pennington. That probably has the physicality, the striking content, and the ability to clinch reasonably well that should result in a win. But I'm going with Raquel Pennington because I know what Raquel Pennington is about and what she's going to bring to the table. I don't know with Lad. She's been very inconsistent for like her last 4 fights. Looking bad against Dumas. Looking bad on the scales and then in the cage against Durandamine. And then looking very good against Kunitskaya and the win over Eubanks. It's weird. It's a weird one. But yeah, I'm going with Pennington until I see some consistency in the weight cutting practices, in the approach to the cage, and the mental game from Aspen Lad. I'm sure there are girls on the roster that I would still pick her over, but in terms of like notable fights, it's a tough one. Then we have Mickey Gall and Mike Mallett. I really want to pick Mike Mallett. I really do. He's a local fighter to me. And I would really, really like to see him win. I think there's hope for it because I'm not a big believer in Mickey Gall. The problem is that Mallett really wants to grapple. His wins traditionally come on the ground. There are some exceptions to that. He does have some knockouts on his resume, but almost everything is a willing grappler. It's kind of weird because with Mickey Gall, you've got a guy who has undoubtedly got some good grappling chops. But then you also have a guy who, in many ways, was nullified on the ground by Randy Brown. A guy who was, in many ways, nullified on the ground by Mike Perry. A guy who was, in many ways, nullified on the ground by Alex Moreno. And very quickly, when you look at it, the best grappler he's beaten is Salim Touari? I guess? It gets kind of bad. That being said, the people who have beaten him tend to either be really, really, really physical freaks, like Perry, Randy Brown, or guys who have a tremendous amount of veteran savvy and grappling ability, and that would be, of course, Diego Sanchez and Alex Moreno. There is some of Alex Moreno to Mike Mallett. There is. And he does have some physicality. But it's not physicality on a Mike Perry or a Randy Brown scale. So I'm taking Mickey Gall. And I might convince myself to change that pick at some point. But I don't know. Mallett, like I said, Mallett's really willing to grapple. Does he have what it takes to out-grapple Mickey Gall? And it's a legitimate question because I think he's a better grappler than anyone that Gall actually has out-grappled. I just, at the same time, don't think he's as good or as physical as the guys who have out-grappled Mickey Gall. So it puts me in a really weird situation. What are the odds on this fight? Is there some money to be made here? Mallett is the favorite. My. We got some smart betting going on this card. There were a couple of like people I was thinking about like pressing as dogs, but they're not really dogs. So ruining my fun in that regard. Gall is the underdog here, actually. And also Gall is old than I always think he is. He's 30 years old. 7-4, most of that in the UFC. I could totally see Mallett winning this fight, and I might go to him by the end by fight time. But right now, I need to see it before I really predict it to happen, I guess. Alexei Olenek, Jerry Vanderaa. Do I think Vanderaa is dumb enough to go to the ground with Alexei Olenek? And unfortunately, this is kind of Alexei Olenek's fights in general right now because his stand-up has always been fairly bad, albeit he does have heavy hands. And he's getting very tired when he stands up now. Vanderaa does have pretty reasonable put-together striking game. Does have a pretty reasonable wrestling game. That should be enough to win against Alexei Olenek. But I have said that before. In fact, I want to know what is my record in Alexei Olenek's fights in the UFC? I need to look this up real quick. How many times in his wins have I actually picked him? I did pick him against Anthony Hamilton. Okay, that's one. I didn't pick him against Rosholt, though, and I didn't pick him against Pesta, and I didn't pick him against Travis Brown. I don't think I picked him against Junior Albini even, and I don't think I picked him against Mark Hunt. I did pick him against Maurice Green. I didn't pick him against Verdum. So I picked him right twice. Overall. That's, it's not a ringing endorsement of my ability to pick Alexei Olenek fights. But, I mean, if Olenek wins, it's going to be some kind of weird choke thing. And I'm hoping that Vanderaa, who showed reasonably good composure, reasonably good fight IQ against Andrei Arlovsky, even in losing, that he can do it. Even though he's not particularly great either, but like his limitations are not necessarily decision making. So I'm going to go with him, but it could be a mess. Anthony Hernandez versus Josh Friend. Fremd with an M. Josh Remd is new to the UFC. He's a 6'4" middleweight, which in itself is pretty interesting. That's tall, that's long, that's lanky. He doesn't have the traditional tall guy problems where like he gets flustered when things get kind of brawly. You see that with a lot of long fighters. They're on the regional scene. They're used to like just having their reach insulate them, and then when it doesn't, they kind of fall apart. He does not have that problem. That being said, he is defensively a mess. He is very hittable. Very hittable. Regardless of what Michael Chiesa said on one of his LFA fights, where he was like praising his defensive footwork acumen. And there's some of it, but oh my God, he was kind of overselling it. He's defensively a mess. Offensively, he's kind of a mess as well. But he is creative. He is powerful. He is deceptively good at finding your button as well. Kind of randomly. And like I said, he doesn't get flustered. That being said, I think Anthony Hernandez is on a different level, athletically speaking. And Anthony Hernandez should be able to kind of bring the brawl to him and get things going. Because, I mean, his best win is... his best win is just not great. Like, whenever... The only real UFC level fighter he fought was Gregory Rodriguez, who smoked him. So what do you do with that? I guess we'll see. I'm a little interested. Like I said, he's sneaky, kind of sneaky good. He does have a reach that might be a problem for somebody. He doesn't get flustered. He does have that cool, calm, and collected thing. He's seen some trouble and fought his way out of it. So there might be something here, but I don't know. He seems kind of action fightery to me. And while I'm not really on the Anthony Hernandez bandwagon, he did look very good against Jinya Park. Yes, he did get beaten convincingly by Kevin Holland and finished by Marcus Perez, which is both kind of disturbing, but he also does have a win over Brendan Allen before he made it to the UFC. And I don't know. And Brendan Allen has proved to be, very, very good. So yeah, going with Anthony Hernandez. Piero Rodriguez versus Kay Hansen. It's another debuting fighter off the Dana White Contenders series in Rodriguez. Good power. Cool, calm, and collected, definitely for sure. A little too single strike for my liking. Not a lot of volume, not a lot of great stuff. Decent footwork though. Her body and leg defense is quite bad, but I don't think that Kay Hansen's really going to exploit that. She does have decent head movement. She does keep a high guard. So, the beginnings of a defensively sound game. And yeah, big power in her hands. In the case of Kay Hansen, she's kind of in the Aspen Lad territory where apparently she's having difficulty making strawweight. Despite being, I think it's like 5'2" or 5'3". 5'2", 63-inch reach. And if she can't hammer that down, it's going to be very bad because we saw her last time out fighting at 125 against Jasmine Vicious. And that was not a good look. That was terrible. I think she can win this fight here because I think of her prior opponents, the most similar to Rodriguez, despite being a predominant grappler, is Jinh Yu Frey. And she beat Frey. And it was because she's pretty physically imposing. She's a reasonably strong girl. Reasonably explosive. I think she can get in on the hips of Rodriguez. I think she can put her on her back. And I think she can probably submit her. But this is kind of a weird one where it's like, how does she look on day in weigh-ins? Because If she's having trouble making 115, obviously that's a pretty big concern. I'm hoping she comes in. I'm hoping she looks good. I'm hoping she looks healthy. And I'm hoping she gets the job done. But like I said, we will see. We will see. She has all the tools. I've been saying that. And she's 7-5. So what are you gonna do? And then we bring up Julio Arse versus Daniel Santos. Why is Arse getting this fight? He's getting a debuting fighter with not a lot of footage about him. Yeah, he lost to Yadong San, but he beat Andre Ewell before that. Lost to Duadu, beat Julian Erosa, lost to Shane Rice, beat Daniel Tamor, beat Danny Gay. It's been that's a win that has aged incredibly well for him. I think Arce has to be. He's only minus 200. Come on, people. Oh, the betting lines have been so good up until this point. No, I feel like this is probably the easiest to predict fight on the card. I think. Don't get me wrong, Santos is a kind of an interesting prospect. He's got a bunch of spinning KOs, which is a little bit weird. He's creative. He's violent. But Arce is a pretty good striker. Really just well put together boxing game with some low kicks. Pretty hard to take down. Pretty hard to dominate as a wrestler. Is at 135 or 145? 35. At 135, he's pretty big. 5'7", 70-inch reach. Although it should be mentioned that Santos is the same height. Although I don't think he's as physically imposing as Arce. I think Arce is the heavier fighter, even if they're the same height in the same weight class. But yeah, I think Arce will pick that up. And that brings us to an end to this card. I am looking forward to it, but I'm looking forward to just like a handful of fights on it. Like I'm really looking forward to Burns versus Chimaev, Dern versus Torres, and Hernandez versus Friend. I think Friend is going to be all kinds of weird fun. And otherwise, I think the theme of this card is people who have not sold me as much as other people, trying to in some cases right the ship after some problems. Kay Hansen, Aspen Lad are great examples of that, or trying to justify their hype that they haven't quite done yet. That would be an Ian Gary and even a Chimaev to a certain extent, and we'll see if they can do that. Could be it's one of those weird things that like this is a card that could age incredibly well as time goes on. And the reason I say that is as my shirt is giving everyone a nice grip of my chest hair. And it's bugging me. The thing is like this is a card that could age very well. Because like if Ian Gary ends up, anywhere near his hype, we're going to look back on this card, and this is kind of the beginning of Ian Gary's era. If Chimaev justifies the hype, we're able to look back and see this is the beginning of the Chimaev era. It's a big moment for Lad. It's a big moment for MacKenzie Dern. It's a big moment for Tj Torres, because if she wins here, does she finally get kind of into title contention where she's kind of just been outside that title contention her entire career? And depending on how things go, we could remember this card very, 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 very well. Or we could remember it as kind of like a false crescendo of sorts for some of these careers. We'll find out. And, 2 title fights is always fun. As much as they're not super interesting title fights. But I think it's looking good. And then what do we got? What do we got next week from the UFC? Let me look here. UFC 273. What's after you? Oh, the Luke versus Bilal Muhammad title or fight night. I'm looking forward to that. It doesn't have a lot of like super meaningful fights. You got Luke versus Muhammad, obviously. It's kind of like a main event. But underneath it, there's a lot of potentially fun fights. It's got a lot. It's got Elizu Zaleski dos Santos on the card. Always fun. It's got Wu Yanan versus Myra Buena Silva. Could be really fun. It's got Haile Alatang versus Kevin Kroom. That could be really fun. It's got Miguel Baeza versus Andre Fial. That could be really fun. And Lord William Knight versus Devin Clark. In a heavy... Devin Clark is going up to heavyweight. What? No. That can't be right. That can't be right. That man should be down at middleweight, frankly. You could also argue that if he'd lose some muscle weight, William Knight probably should be as well. Is that legitimately booked at heavyweight? Is Wikipedia just wrong? That's at heavyweight. Ooh. Is that short? That better be short notice. That better not be a plan for either of them, because I don't think that's gonna work. Especially for William Knight, because William Knight's style is incredibly reliant on the idea of him being just intimidating. And at heavyweight and at 5'10", yeah, he's going to be muscly as heck. He's still going to be jacked, but it's like me fighting at heavyweight. It's a bad idea. No. And Devin Clark, no. Oh. You can tell I'm not down with that. I'm not down with that. And Chris Barnett's on the card, so you know I'm gonna love it if Chris Barnett's on the card. He's always gonna do something weird and destructive. So that's the card. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you enjoy the card. I'm like I said, a little down on it, but I hope you enjoy. And we'll just leave it at that. And as per usual, check out my Discord group. We got the MMA sim there. It's all kinds of fun. We got a slam ball sim there now too. And yeah, that's all I really got to say. And that is all.